matters. It breaks my heart how so many times I've even talked to young families, and they say, when we had kids, then we became a family. As if you weren't a family before you had children. As if those people who cannot have children are not a family. That's not true. You say, but Kyle, you don't know. When we had kids, they just brought us together. They brought a fun dynamic. Yes, and they should bring a fun dynamic, and they ought to bring you together. But they should not have brought you to this finally place of cohesion. In fact, let's be transparent. Typically, kids causes more division. You and your spouse were a family before the kids came, and you will be a family long after they leave. And far too many times we get stuck on either end of these pendulums with our kids and with our parenting, that either they can do no wrong or they can only do wrong. Or they get whatever they want, or they have to earn everything like I did. And let me just say, let's seek to not treat our kids in pendulum swings and extremes. So how do we do this? How do we do this? And I want to use the word adventure. How do we do this adventure called family ministry and parenting? Again, nobody has done it perfect. Some have done it better than others. Nobody has done it perfect. But what I want to do is I just kind of want to walk through how I believe Paul calls us to treat and to love one another. And I want to pause a couple different times and give you, instead of giving you points in a sermon, I want to give you practical ideas of application. The first one I want to do is this, and specifically talking to those of you whose children have grown up and they've actually turned out pretty well. And to those of you who have young kids that you're hoping that they turn out well, let me give you a practical idea. Why don't you surround yourselves with parents whose grown-up kids look like you want your kids to look like when they grow up? When's the last time you examined somebody else's kids and said, they're not perfect, because nobody's perfect, but I like how your kids turned out. Not only do they claim to love Jesus, they actually seem to like him a lot. My wife, who's way smarter than I am, and I know you were like, let's just keep going. Don't tell us the stuff we already know. But my wife, a number of years ago, before our now 15-year-old daughter was 3 years old, she found a mom and she said, I like how your oldest daughter turned out. What did you do? What did you not do? Hey, your oldest daughter seems to actually like her siblings. What did you do? What did you not do? Are we willing to get around one another and to share what we did and what God did as we're working through this thing called life? To ask all the questions we can. See, here's the problem. Here's the problem. I don't think we know where we're going. In Alice in Wonderland, the Cheshire Cat said something very, very interesting. He said this. He said, we're all crazy here. I'm crazy. Wrong quote. Sorry. But that is true. No, there's a scene in Alice in Wonderland when Alice comes upon the Cheshire Cat and she says this, would you tell me, please, which way should I go from here? The cat says, it depends a good deal on where you want to get. I don't really much care where I go, Alice began to say. The cat interrupted, saying, then it doesn't matter which way you go. Alice continued, as long as I get somewhere. To which the Cheshire Cat responded, oh, you're sure to do that if you walk long enough. I think sometimes we don't have an idea of where we want to go, and so we don't know why we ended up where we ended up. Unfortunately, there's a whole lot more intentionality than laziness when it comes to parenting. It's not like throwing the car into neutral and just coasting down down the road and the hill. Parenting is something that you have to pay attention to. And so let's look at this passage. It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7, it says this. It says, love is patient, love is kind. It is not jealous, it does not brag, it is not arrogant, it does not act unbecomingly, it does not seek its own, it is not easily provoked. It does not take into account wrongs suffered. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but it rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So, what does he say here? Well, first of all, he starts out and he says, love is patient. Now, I got to be honest with you. He could have started out with any other better word. Right? Love is patient. Really? You got to start there? Why couldn't you say, love makes their lunch in the morning? Like, we could all do that, right? Now he says, love is patient. Patience or long-suffering is defined as the capacity to accept, to tolerate, to delay problems or suffering without becoming annoyed or anxious. I don't know about you, but I don't do too well with that. I tend to try to rush. I tend to try to want to respond before I process. I had a guy the other day say this to me, Kyle, when attacked with criticism, listen to learn and then think to discern, then speak. Listen to learn, think to discern, then speak. He said, he says, love is patient. We are called to be patient and loving towards one another, especially when it comes to people that frustrate us. I think for far too long, I have confused my kids with something else. I've lived like my kids look for ways to frustrate me. I live like other drivers on the road, frankly, live and drive to frustrate me. When really, most people and most times my kids, they're just trying to figure it out. We have to temper our temper. We have to breathe. I have a 10-year-old little boy who genuinely does not wake up in the morning and go, all right, here's how we're going to annoy Dad today, right? Here's how we're going to annoy Dad. My son Jude tends to be like his father, and he tends to act and then think about it and then process his emotions of what's going on. And so a couple years ago, I sat down with him and I said, Jude, we need to build a game plan. And so our game plan is breathe, think, and then act. Because he tends to get frustrated. And I know that part of it is to deal with his older sisters who tend to pick on him and like to pick on him. But I've tried to explain to him that, Jude, you're going to spend the rest of your life dealing with people that want to pick on you. It's just as they get older, they get more divisive in their picking, right? I said, Jude, wherever you go, you are always in control of how you respond. Here's the problem. I needed to preach that to me. But I said, Jude, here's what you and I are going to do. We're going to breathe. We're going to think about the situation, and then we're going to act. Because a lot of times we act first, and then we breathe, and then we think, and then possibly we breathe about it. Here's my question: what would our homes look like or sound like if we did those three things? What could our family look like if we spoke in patience to one another? The second issue with patience is that I think we filled our lives with way too much. I talked to this about this with the leaders yesterday. Our world, we know the statistics positively demonstrate and show that we as a culture are more depressed and anxious than ever before in the span of human existence, or from what we know from history. And yet we are busier people. I cannot take one more time somebody asking me, hey, what's going on in your life? How you doing? I'm just busy. Who's in charge of your schedule, Kyle? Right? Who's in charge of it? Who's in charge of what's going on? If we can't eat family dinner together, seated around the table at the same time with one another on a regular basis, we probably need to rethink our schedule. Also, we need to remember, parents, our children do not need to follow in our footsteps. They do not need to do the things that we always wanted to do but couldn't do or were unable to do. Some of us are not being patient with our children or our families because they aren't joyfully doing the things that we want to do but they don't want to do. We can build patience with someone when we hear them, when we understand them. And let me tell you right now, not that you need to eat every meal across the dinner table, because that doesn't always work, even for my schedule. But when you have those regular times, it gives you a time to have this weird thing that they talk about in the Bible, but we so few practice. It's called fellowship, building relationship. Here's a practical idea. Sit down and have a conversation with your children and ask them what they would like to do. I'm not advocating that you let your kids do everything that they want to do. I'm just saying, I am advocating that you sit down and you ask your kids what would they like to do. Number 2, love is kind. Kindness is lending somebody your strength in a time when they are experiencing weakness. This is not about making them feel bad or lesser. That is not kindness. Kindness is not fixing everything that every problem that a kid is having. I've had that struggle. I'm sure you've had that struggle. Where sometimes I watch some parents, a kid is going through something, and they swoop in and they fix the problem for the kid, and then the kid just learns, oh, mom and dad will fix everything. That's not the solution. That's not kindness. It's okay to let your kids work through and work out struggles and hardships, but come alongside of them. We need to learn that we need to not fight against our children, but fight for our children. This situation happens when your kid messes up and you breathe, remembering that you start with patience and then you, out of kindness, step into the problem with them. And it doesn't sound like, well, why did you do that? Well, did you think anything else would happen, right? Or my favorite that I hear, well, that was stupid. Yes, let's be transparent. Most of the time we know when we did stupid. And I don't need somebody to remind me that I did stupid. I need somebody to help me to lovingly respond and walk through my stupidity. This is a, oh no, I'm so sorry that happened. Okay, what are you going to do next, or what are we going to do next? Kindness may let our children walk through some bit of consequences alone as we check in, or kindness may walk with them through the consequences. Now, there may also be times that you do help them through those consequences. I'm not saying that you can't do those things. I'm just saying that kindness does not take the consequences from them, and also kindness does not heap even more grief or guilt upon those consequences. Kindness may actually be the hardest thing that is said. It doesn't negate the consequences, but it always is covered in love. It's always communicated in grace. When Jesus came, he always spoke full of grace and truth. And let me ask you a question. How long did it take you and I to get out of our stupidity? Well, okay, let's be honest. Some of us are still there, right? But it took us a while, right? And how old are they? It's going to take them time. They need somebody to help them process. Well, I never had anybody else process. Well, love your kid better and help them have somebody to process with. Number 3, love is not jealous. It does not brag. It is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. Again, your kids aren't here to follow in your footsteps or for you to live your life through them now. And it's okay if your kid never accomplishes that thing that you got to accomplish. Well, I was an Eagle Scout, so you need to be an Eagle Scout. I'm not saying that you can't ask your kid if they want to be an Eagle Scout. I'm not saying you can't encourage and push your kid to do that. I'm just saying it is not their responsibility to literally be your robotical clone. One of the hardest things, this is going to sound really, really stupid, okay? Well, one of the hardest things in the world, I am a massive Superman fan. I collect all these Superman things. I can tell you the long story, but we don't have the time to do that. But I collect all these different things. And so when my son was born, I was like, oh, I'm going to pass this on to him. And we had a Superman, emblem on his wall, and we had little characters and different things. And when he was 3 years old, he brought me all of that stuff, and he laid it at my feet, and he said, Dad, you left this in my room. This is yours. I like Iron Man. That was my son, Sam. If you see him wandering the streets, I said, okay, Jude. And he left the room, and my wife looked at me, and she said, how hard was that? And I said, it's really weird. That was really hard. She goes, but you know that your son is not equating his life. And I said, yeah, but again, how many times do we do that? Do we go down wrong roads of affection and wrong roads of love and wrong roads of honoring as if they did all those things and checked off the checkbox, we'd feel better loved? Let's be honest, our kids sometimes check off the checkbox and we're more annoyed because they did it because they were supposed to do it, not because they wanted to do it. That has nothing to do with how you and your spouse respond to one another, right? We need to cheer our kids on. It needs to break our hearts when we hear of families that have held our kids back from living to their full potential because they might outshine the parent. It also breaks my heart when I talk to parents who don't let their kids follow after what they want to do. One of the biggest things that breaks my heart are times that I have spoken to parents, several parents who have come to me with tears in their eyes saying, Kyle, my kid wanted to go to Bible school. My kid wanted to be a youth pastor. My kid came to me one day when I said, hey, what do you want to do? And I said, man, I really like Mike, man. I think Mike is one of the coolest guys in the world. I would love to be Mike. And I looked at them and said, go get a real degree and a real job, and one day when you have enough money, if you want to step into ministry, I will support you. I had a dad one time looking at me at a missions conference as my wife shared her testimony. We were at the church my wife grew up in, and my wife shared her testimony, and this guy came up to us afterwards, and he said, I knew your testimony. When you guys launched out of this church to go be missionaries, my daughter looked at me and said, I want to be like Nicola. And I did everything within my power. I literally even prayed against it for her. And he said, and today my daughter wants nothing to do with the church, nothing to do with the word. And I don't even know if she says she believes in God anymore. We are facing an epidemic where we are having less and less kids go to Bible college to learn the word, go to be in positions of ministry, because we've convinced them that they have to get a real degree first. And then we wonder why our schools and our world and our communities look the way that they do. I'm not saying every single one of your kids needs to be in full-time ministry, but I'm saying if God has put that in their hearts, we need to encourage that. We need to cheer that. We should not be choosing between sports and a youth activity. Now, there are some times that happens, but when it's on a regular basis, I think we ought to check ourselves, because then we get down the road and we wonder and we ask ourselves, why are my kids not really interested in the things of God? Because I've taught them that it's okay not to be interested in the things of God. Practical question. When's the last time you asked the kid what they wanted to do and then cheered them on about it? Number 4, love does not take into account wrong suffered. It keeps no record of wrong. I believe that the point to obedience is to build the relationship. Therefore, the point to consequences ought to be to mend or to restore the relationship. You get that? If obedience is to build the relationship, then when they don't obey, it's to mend back that relationship. It all goes back to relationship. And I got to be honest with you, there are far too many times I've made disobedience more about them understanding the weight of their consequences than rebuilding the relationship. And I sometimes in my grief, and I do not say this in any, well, it doesn't sound really good at all, but sometimes after they've fulfilled the consequences, looked at them with a stern look or said, yeah, but did you understand what, or I said that statement, if you do it again. You know what that statement says? When you do it again, and I'm expecting you to do it again. That's just me keeping a record of wrong. Far too many times we have punished out of anger and frustration, and that is more childish than the childish behavior. We, as the parents, as the adults, ought to be in control of our tongues and our reaction and our response. We do not take into account what they have done to us so that we can deal out the consequences so that they can understand. We would need to remember that we are the example. We don't hold our past wrongs over people, over kids, over family. But most times that I found somebody that holds a past wrong over other people, it's because people have held past wrongs over them. But what does Paul say here? Paul says, love keeps no record of wrong. But you don't know what they did to me. You're right, I don't. I just know what Jesus did for you, and praise God, he doesn't keep a record of wrong. Amen? How many times do we long for Jesus to treat us one way, but we treat other people another way? Now, yes, he was the perfect Son of God. Yes, I get that. And you're not the perfect Son of God. In fact, let me remind you one more time. You're not perfection, and you're not. We know that. But let's breathe together. When's the last time in the midst of a frustration you allowed yourself to laugh because it's actually a laughable situation? It's okay. Again, if obedience is to build the relationship, then consequences or disobedience ought to be brought in to rebuild or to mend that relationship. Practical idea. Why don't we break this cycle? And possibly there's something today that we need to go home and let go of. Possibly today there's something that we need to sit down with our spouse or with our children or pick up the phone and call somebody to let go of the wrong that we've been holding against them. I believe with all of my heart that there is no greater freedom than allowing the chains to be broken from a past wrong done in somebody's life. Our churches, our communities, our world is filled to the brim with people that live in a way of sorrow and grief and anxiety and depression because of something done wrong to them 20 years ago. There are some of you in here today that still carry around weights of words that your parents said to you years ago. There are some of you that have a situation or a hurt in your life that you are so afraid of somebody finding out about because of a consequence you went through when one person found out about it. And that is a prison that you do not need to live in. That is a prison that the Lord is not interested in you living in. There's a story in history, it's called The Tale of Three Edwards. It's the story about how these different kings rose into power and conquered somebody else, and rose into power and conquered somebody else, and there were these three men, back to back to back. They were brothers. And the one brother came in and he captured his other brother's land. He wanted his brother's land. His brother was a rather obese king. And the people thought, you need to take grace, you need to take mercy on your brother. And this Edward that stepped into power was known as a cruel, cruel man. But the people pled with him. Be kind to your brother. Be gracious with your brother. And so the king said, here's what I will do. I will put him in a room, but I will not put a door, and he is free to leave whenever he wants. Here's the problem. He built him a rather large room with a normal-sized door, knowing that his brother couldn't fit through it. And then every day, he brought him pastries and food and delicacies and drink. And anything that his brother wanted, he brought to him. It actually went on so long that the imprisoned brother outlived the other brother. Another person came in and destroyed him. But by the time they got to the room and to the time that they tore down the walls, his physical health had debilitated so much so that it was only a couple years later that he died because of physical ailments. But he lived for years imprisoned by his own appetites. Let me transition back to what we're talking about. Some of you live imprisoned by your past wrongs. And what the devil wants to do, not the Lord, but what the devil wants to do every single day is say, hey, you're free. You can get up and you can leave anytime you want. Hey, you're okay. Hey, no, yeah, you've been forgiven. Oh, by the way, but these people don't know about it, right? Oh. You do realize that if you talked about it, these people would shame you, right? You do realize that if you talked about it, pastor would never give you a spot to be in a leadership position in the church. You do realize that if the community found out about it, everybody would shame you, right? And we live in the prisons that were never meant to withhold us. Jesus came to give grace and freedom and hope. And we now as parents, we now as adults, we now as leaders are called to offer that same grace and hope and freedom and forgiveness to people that we interact with, specifically and especially those people within our homes. Number 5, love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. Now, we already kind of talked about this, but when our kid is wrong and has done wrong, breathe. It's okay. Help them walk through it. It breaks my heart today that I look at a society that actually is vaulting up and rejoicing in wrongs done. It breaks my heart even more to watch parents rise up alongside of their kids because they're afraid of their child's reaction if they tell them that they're wrong. The reaction from their child and the reaction from society. But it breaks my heart even more to watch those parents then come to church and serve on Sunday. We cannot and will not agree with everything in society, and we should not agree with everything in society. I'm not advocating that we go make picketing signs and we go stand outside alongside the road and say horrible things to other people. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that there's not a time to stand up and to take courses of action, but what I am saying is our character shining out every single day in the things that we do and the things that we say, and when we mess up, which we will, are we willing to admit that we were wrong? So that then when our kids or our family messes up, we do not rejoice and vault what they've done that they're wrong, and we don't stay silent and really agree with what they're doing that's wrong, but we lovingly respond in that moment. We don't ignore it. We don't act like it didn't happen. We address it, and then again, as kindness says, we help them through it. And lastly, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love is there when all else fades and falls away. Love doesn't say, I told you so. Love believes better. Again, in disciplining our children, the challenge is not to use the phrase, hey, if that ever happens again. Or, I told you that would happen. Or, well, what did you expect? I think that we need to reframe our words and reframe our brains, because we need to remember that we're the ones that are there to set the example. They're the ones that don't know better. So let's help them know better. Let's help them walk through it. Let's not prepare the consequences before the action is done. Let's prepare our hearts to meet them if anything happens. Today, as I look through our continuous cycle of hurt that leads to hurt, that leads to hurt, that spreads hurt to others, I'm gripped with the question, who will step in and offer hope? Who will be different? We don't want our kids to have to face the same hardships that we grow up with, right? So then it is our time to be different. I don't care how old our children are. I don't care if they're still in the home or not in the home. It is never too late to begin lovingly parenting our children. When's the last time that we sat down and just laughed with our kids? When's the last time we sat down and played a board game or played that video game with those kids? When's the last time we took them out for chocolate ice cream or a sundae or a donut? When's the last time we looked to rearrange our schedule to do something fun? When's the last time you woke them up in the middle of the night to take them out for late night treats? When's the last time I was willing to rearrange my life to show them that they were more important than anything else in it? When's the last time I had a conversation about something that I was learning in the message or asked them what they got out of the message? Parents, I believe with all of my heart that God is speaking to us as parents and in this ministry of parenting. And for those of you whose kids have grown up and moved away, your ministry of parenting is still there. Your ministry of connection is still there. And your ministry of parenting to other parents in the midst of the foxhole could be so important and encouraging. I believe that love ought to be challenging. And so we are called to show the world that we're different. I believe that we're called to show our children that we're different. And so let us set a new direction down new roads, offering a new way of looking at life and responding to problems. But I promise you it's going to take our most valuable commodity. It's going to take time. But people will and always still spell love T-I-M-E. And are we willing to give of our time, which communicates us giving of ourselves? Father, I thank you so much for who you are. I thank you so much just for what you're calling us to do. And Heavenly Father, this is not an easy task. This is not an easy call. This is not a simple, just do this. Oh, just add this to our schedule. No, Lord, I believe with all my heart that this literally is us stopping one thing and beginning another. Lord, I know that there are people here today with families and situations that I have no idea what they're facing, but you do. And I thank you that in the midst of our pain and in the midst of our hurt, you never look at us and say, I told you so. Well, what did you expect? If you ever do that again, you've never responded that way to any of us. And so, Father, I pray right now. I pray for that mom and dad that's just struggling today and could just use some prayer. Father, I pray that they would come and they would find one of the pastors down front, one of the people down front, and they would just say, hey, would you just pray over us? We're exhausted, we're frustrated, we're annoyed. Father, I pray for that husband and wife dynamic, however old they are, God, that just seems to be continually quarreling. And Lord, that they would maybe even come today and find somebody and say, hey, could you help us find somebody to offer help and offer hope? Father, I pray for that person that maybe is being reminded today of a past hurt that was done to them when they were a child or from their parents, that needs to come today and just lay it at the altar and say, God, I'm going to hand it over to you. I can't change my past, but I don't want this to imprison me anymore. Father, I pray for those people that are here maybe today beginning to talk about starting a family, that I have not discouraged them. But Father, I also pray for that person that is here today hearing about love that is patient and is kind. And I keep talking about you, Jesus. And they've heard how he came to this earth to die on the cross for their sins, to rise again from the dead, that he offered us that love that is patient and kind and does not easily get angered and does not suffer or does not get angry, does not keep records of wrong. Lord, that person that today still has not come to that place of accepting you as their Savior, that God, today would be the day of their salvation. Father, as we sing this beautiful hymn, may we not stay in our seats when we know we are to go. still closed as these pastors are making their way.